Welcome, everyone, to the All Out Coach podcast. This is the show in which we cross over and we combine the best of different industries, platforms, in order to stay competitive and also to stay sports athletes with full sportsmanship as well as social responsibility. Today, I'm excited to have a top 100 global digital health influencer, João Bocas, with us. He's a keynote speaker and also he's the consultant as well as an expert who's going to discuss with us some of the latest emerging innovations in digital wearable healthcare devices today. Joao, how are you today? Very nice to meet you.
Tim, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me and this magnificent introduction. By the way, I love the video with the sports and everything. Well done.
Yes, it's and speaking of sports, I read that you have a sports background. I know you're joining us from England, and you're originally from Portugal. So I want to ask you if your sports background had an inspiration in pursuing a career and a business in digital wearable devices.
Well, to a certain degree, yes. But let me tell you a bit about myself. As you mentioned, I'm Portuguese, living in UK the past 20 years. But in my childhood, I always been, I mean, I've always been in love with sport. So I play soccer, football since an early age. I play tennis. I play table tennis. I play basketball, volleyball. In Portugal, is a very rich combination of sports. And actually, by the way, when I moved to UK, this is a bit of a personal story. When I moved to UK, I hated life in England because I didn't speak English. I was doing those jobs no one wants to do, cleaning and working in kitchens, hotels, restaurants. And then I graduated with a sports degree. And for many years in UK, for maybe like over 10 years, I work in professional sport for a local club. Now it's a Premier League club, Brighton and Hove Albion. I work with the academy and the community kids, coaching sport. But I've always been very active as a runner. I started to do the triathlons in my 40s. I've always been like a sports lover, and I love to watch sport. I love tennis, football, running, triathlon. I watch a combination of sports. So I'm very influenced as a person by sport, and I love everything associated with sport. The motivational side of things, the performance, the challenges, the winning, the mindset, everything. So I think that to a certain degree has helped me as an entrepreneur. And I believe that is a strong combination of sports and health and wellness. So it's a natural kind of progression for me to go from sports, fitness, and health because I was working in corporate wellness for a number of years, and then I just branch out to healthcare technology. It was a kind of a natural progression. So yes, they interlinked, in my opinion.
Yeah. I've described Jose Mourinho, the celebrated global coach who, on All Out Coach, actually. I've spoken about him quite a lot. And I know that he himself never really reached the Premier League in the Portuguese, yet he has become such an idol, right, in coaching. So I'm quite fascinated by, your country, Portugal, and also always interweave that sports component, that competitive component into the science in medical affairs and my background as well. I want to ask you a first question, which may be helpful for those who may not be experts about wearables. How do they separate the signal from the noise among all of this new information that's coming out in digital wearable devices?
Very, very good question. Well, the wearables are kind of, they have a long history, like from the 15th century, Chinese century, that they had like some measurement on a like wristband. They used to do counting activities, but in all essence, the fitness wearable trackers, they only been around since like 2009. Fitbit launched in 2009, and then in 2011 they have a more upgraded fitness version. But I would say now we see the smartwatches and the progression with all types of wearables. But I believe we have to differentiate in here the purpose, the usage, and also the individuality is very personal, So, for example, people that just want a wearable for personal health and fitness. If we talk about the healthcare industry, is a different ballgame. So, I would merge into very strong categories: the consumer health and then the medical device.
Mm-hmm. So consumer health and medical device. So what are some of those differences between the new Apple Watch that I recently read about, right? The Fitbit, and the ones in which you help many different organizations as a consultant, or some of the ones that you're watching now? Are there um, particular ones that pique your interest, Joe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Apple Watch is very popular. I personally, I like smart watches, but I believe that we are entering a different phase, that the smartwatches will become maybe obsolete in 5 or 10 years' time, because now we have smart rings, we have the Aura ring. Anyway, it displays all the sleep data, heart rate variability, fitness activity. But we are entering a different phase in wearables. They're becoming more sophisticated, smaller. They go in different places. We have like the AirPods. We have like earrings. We have smart belts. You name it, smart shoes.
Right.
But what I see now is also a bit of a conflict, not to get controversial around Apple, but Apple is actually innovating around, for example, some medical data, but they position the wearable as not as a medical device, as a wellness device, but it's actually carrying out medical data. Now you see you got ECG, you got like heart rate, you got lots of different things. So I think is a bit of is confusing for the consumer, and also is a lack of direction and a lack of guidance, because okay, we have all these capabilities, but then what we do with it?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are many challenges associated with that, and I've done actually a 159 pages report around health consumer wearables engagement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And from the device side, interoperability, battery issues, uncomfortable people, they say after a while they don't want to use them. But one of the things that came up very, very strongly was personalization. Because when the big brands do a wearable, in general, it's kind of impossible to personalize to every individual. But personalization was one of the issues, and also a lack of guidance, from a
Mm-hmm.
user related barrier. People
Mm-hmm.
need
Mm-hmm.
a bit more than just the wearable. They need
Right.
certain guidance about making the most out of the data, the usage, the engagement, because the long-term engagement is an issue. About 0.5% of the people after 6 months they stop using them, or because they lost them, or they forgot to charge, or they
Mm-hmm.
broke the pattern, or you leave them on the top of the fridge. And I've been guilty of that so many times. And I had so many wearables, Tim. I tested like lots of different wearables and brands, and I
Yeah.
know what's like. I know what's like. So the long-term engagement is extremely important. No engagement, no data, no data, no value.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more than just the wearable. There are other elements that are extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the way you summarize that. And I know that Natalie Eden, our mutual friend from Impetus Digital, was the one that essentially connected us, because I watched your interview with her with Impetus Digital, where you provided just a comprehensive and a very timely, review on wearables. And what you touched on now is, how do you really apply that information, right, from that data? And I have the same question that pops in my head, in terms of, how do you really validate that accuracy, how accurate the data is, as well, and the privacy, of the uses of these wearables? And I know there are some digital therapeutics that are approved by the FDA, that Pear Therapeutics has for substance abuse, or for respiratory issues that are combined with technology that's combined with an inhaler, for example. Right? And so, how do you? What are your approaches to the validity of the data and the accuracy and the privacy issues that can?
Sure, that's a very important question here. I think to start with, we're gonna narrow down to these two segmentations: the medical device and the consumer health.
Okay.
The consumer health, they present actually between brands, without mentioning any names, but I've done lots of studies and been involved in many with many wearables. And between a brand, for example, it can give you a 20 or 25% discrepancy from one wearable to other, your fitness diet or your steps or your sleep. So that represents a challenge in terms of in the medical industry. If you have, for example, a discrepancy of 20% of your heart rate or your heart rate variability or your temperature, and for clinical decision making, I mean, that's not good, because you want to make a decision with the patient. But also, the medical device industry is regulated by the FDA, so they need to have a certain level of accuracy and they inspire some kind of trust. And also in UK by the MHRA, the Medical Device and Healthcare Regulatory Agency. Okay, so that gives you a bit more, let's say, trust that the accuracy is kind of there or thereabout, with very little discrepancy. But the other issue that is here present to us is there is no really benchmark, because it's a kind of a new emerging industry.
Right.
There is no benchmark to say, actually, you need to do certain things to get the regulation and get approved by the authorities and everything, okay, studies, but there is no benchmark for the industry as such. There is no like, okay, let's compare. For example, if we're talking about the car industry, you can say from 100 years ago, compare the motors, the pollution, you can compare lots of different things. In here, there is no really benchmark because it's a new industry. So,
and sorry to interrupt, are you referring to all wearables at this point, consumer health or
in general,
right?
Yes. There is no benchmark for the industry. You know, there is a lot more work to be done to create, I mean, a more proposal, benchmark for users, for innovators, for those using wearables. I think there is a lot of work to be done. In terms of regulation, there is a clear path to be regulated if you are a medical device, certain things that you have to do. But then there is no benchmark for users, for providers, I think is a lot missing, you know?
Yeah. So to make it clear for those who might be listening, and by the way, we're live right now on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. So make sure to post your comments. We're getting some likes right now on Facebook, by the way. João, I want to ask, to clarify, do you stratify the different kind of clients with whom you work? You know, are there particular companies with which you work exclusively or primarily to help them differentiate their products in this industry?
Up till now, Tim, to be honest, I work with lots of different brands, but up till now I try to stay independent. I'm not associated with a brand as such. There are some brands that I prefer or work more often, but I've been doing quite a lot of consulting more on the healthcare side. Okay, for example, advising healthcare companies what is out there. I've done a lot of projects on scrutinizing the market and say, look, these are 10 wearables for this, and instead of, for example, a large pharma company or a healthcare or life science organization spending 6 months or 9 months researching the market, I've done that intelligence, I can say, in a couple of weeks, saying, look, and put them in touch with the providers to exchange ideas, pricing, research case studies. So I've done a lot of work in that regard. I try to stay agnostic, as I'm not a wearable, but as a professional. And I try to stay independent and advise them as best as I can and bring my network and my expertise into the mix.
Would you say it has become easier to bring a new wearable to the market for patients and care consumers access? Or could you summarize that process now, as it stands today?
I would say, Tim, to not to want to play devil's advocate, but
Right.
I would say it's actually harder.
Oh, really?
In terms of regulation, it's probably easier because there are more devices regulated than the FDA and other institutions. Okay, if there is a level of satisfaction, they will approve. Okay, if there is a study and they are reliable and everything. But I would say that in terms of entering the market, it's become harder and harder because there are more medical devices. The big players have more money for marketing. So I know a lot of small innovators that have a great product, and I'm finding very difficult to, for example, raise money and go to market because it's a bit of a catch-22. You got a great product, but if nobody knows about it, if you don't have money to splash money in marketing to say, look, there is my product globally,
right?
So you're fighting against several barriers in here. You're fighting against, or not just the money, but you're fighting against not having money to compete with the other products, the launch to the marketplace, and then the reliability of the product. So there are certain things that kind of, in my eyes, are becoming more and more difficult to overcome because there are more innovators, and the ones that are in the marketplace, they advance their technologies, they launch version 2, version 3, and new products, and they are established. So I think it's becoming more difficult in a way.
Okay. So, then what are some of the key factors then that play the most important role in the adoption, and utilization of these wearables? How would you,
Sure.
address that?
From a user related engagement, I would say in terms of adoption, the lack or the increase of intrinsic motivation is extremely important. Okay, so for example, if you are diabetic and if you need to use a device every day, you do it for that purpose. Yeah. For the adoption of the consumer market is much different. People are motivated by different factors, or fashion, or looking good, or whatever that is. But there are certain things. You mentioned privacy before and security.
Yeah.
There are some other barriers that actually need to be overcome in terms of increasing adoption, even ethics and privacy, because nobody wants to use a wearable to nobody wants to track them. So people are actually suspicious about the big pharma organizations, or to have a big brother because the employer know how many hours they're going to sleep last night. So there are a couple of things that ethically need to be overcome, and by communicating that openly with employers, providers, and everything. But there are also like other things that, as an individual, people need to understand. I would say you need to ask yourself the question, why do I want to use a wearable? Everybody's got different levels of motivation, or you want to lose weight or increase your level of physical activity or sleep more. Me particularly, I'm fairly active. I'm not interested in my steps, but I'm interested in my sleep. I'm interested to, I'm sleeping.
It's become a luxury these days, right?
Yes.
In the pandemic.
Yes. And it's extremely important for performance. We're talking about the sports background before. I'm sleeping 5-6 hours. I need to be sleeping 7 or 8. So,
same thing.
Yeah. So I'm keeping one eye on that. The 10 or 12,000 steps is not that important for me right now. It was important maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah. So things change, and I'm driven by a different type of information and motivation these days. But there are other things that stop the adoption. The price from the consumer market is different, but in the healthcare market is always an issue because who's going to pay for the device? The healthcare providers No, the healthcare systems, they don't have money. The governments, they don't really want to pay for it. The insurers are also trying to kind of see what's going on first instead of subsidizing and investing. So it's always these issues to overcome. The price is not a big issue, but in the healthcare market, as a private industry, is the issue. I mean, if you don't buy yourself a blood pressure monitor or a smartwatch, in principle, nobody's gonna give that to you, even if there is a direct benefit. So there are some pitfalls in here in terms of adoption. But I think what happened now is, I think COVID really, the pandemic highlighted a lot of the potential for wearables, and also what can be done in digital health. Because let me picture this scenario. A few months ago, with the middle of the pandemic, we couldn't go to hospitals, we couldn't leave home, we couldn't go to a doctor. So how do we keep an eye, for example, on monitoring patients, managing their conditions, try to reverse their condition, try to keep an eye on what is important to act on or not? So, and the answer is with wearables, because the wearables gather information, gather intelligence, and give you a picture of what's going on with that person at a particular time in a particular setting. So I think the adoption is actually, we're entering a different phase of adoption, and we are seeing a lot of progress now. And about 20-25% of the adult population, for example, in UK, have a wearable. So it's not like a novice thing that is not a new thing. People have Apple Watches, Fitbits, and even your mobile now with the health apps, they give you a lot of data. So I think we are entering a mass adoption phase now, where we actually can really dive into the data and market intelligence and everything.
Yeah, we're in the data of information, and in the age of information and the age of data now, right? And I think a lot of the wearables can help bridge potential gaps in healthcare as well, which I know I'll ask you about next. But one question that I want to also pose here is, what kind of specific tips do you have for different companies that are interested, different businesses that are interested in entering this emerging and now crowded market? How do they differentiate their wearable device?
Well, yeah, good question. Tim, I mentioned some of my views around entering the market is becoming more difficult and more challenging, competitive. But I would say understanding the marketplace is important, the product market fit, but also what is really important is the positioning of the product. Yeah. Okay. If we're targeting healthcare providers, you position to healthcare providers. It's very important to kind of understand, like, what is the product doing for who, So it's really important, because I've done that in the past with my startup days, and I've seen a lot of companies kind of having a product and try to kind of gather for anybody. So it's important to in the first place find a differentiator, but then working on the positioning of the product, and that in nowadays it can be the positioning in marketing, it can be the positioning using influencers, it could be the positioning of the message, it could be the position of looking sexier than the next product. Is a lot of different things to certainly to consider. But I would say try things out, but have a clear strategy and vision where you're going with it, because it's not an easy thing to do, that you can be trying things for 2 or 3 years. Otherwise, the companies, they just die in a hard way.
Yeah, when they don't adapt. So can you share some the preview into your approaches at Digital Salutem, where you're a CEO? Can you share just a glimpse of your organizational structure, or just what particular marketing or other services you offer?
Sure. Tim, one of the things that we've been doing recently, I have a YouTube healthcare channel, by the way. It's called Digital Health and Wearable Series for big brands. I'm interviewing global leaders every week, from public leaders to CEOs of healthcare organizations. Anyway, I would say with Digital Salutem, I have a big vision to make healthcare uncomplicated, and I'm on a mission to kind of use technology to make healthcare better. Okay, but in terms of the company, we have a global ambition. We are based in UK, but work globally with lots of different brands. And recently, I've been working with a lot of very large brands, and we have the marketing side, where we leverage my networks, which I've been doing the last 7 or 8 years. I built a big following on Twitter, LinkedIn. So we're helping healthcare organizations to be well known and get reputation in their own industries. But also now we have the digital health transformation side, that we help healthcare organizations to ramp up digital transformation very rapidly with adoption of a world-class technology. So we have these two streams of the business.
Great. Yeah, I caught a few of the episodes on your YouTube channel, by the way. Yeah, and I enjoyed them. Slowly becoming an expert, not nearly there yet, but this is certainly an area of huge interest for me. So you mentioned the quality of healthcare and the vision that you have to make healthcare less complicated. I really appreciate that, because I think a lot of the innovation is reflected in simplicity, in its simplicity. And I completely agree with you. I mean, the corporate wellness background that you have also makes me think of 15 years ago, when I was at AstraZeneca, when all of the employees were handed a pedometer, and they were grouped into teams in which they competed against each other on how healthy or how many more steps their teams actually made. And simple solutions like that are still highlights in my mind, and I know that technology capabilities have increased exponentially since then in terms of what you can do with wearables now. So a lot of your comments ring very true for me. So what are some best examples then of metrics that show improvement of patient outcomes? Are there particular episodes or metrics that you've seen that you can share with the audience of how they've helped, patient outcomes directly?
Sure. I mean, is a particular case in here, for example, in diabetics, you use a device to is a kind of a need, isn't it? Is a need. You need the insulin, you need to gather information, you need to check, and you need to see where you are. And now we're entering a different phase, that actually there are medical devices that start to tell you how much insulin you need in the body by being with you 24/7, which is a revolution. But also, what I'm seeing now is the wearables bringing a lot of data value, for example, from ECG to body temperature, SpO2, respiratory, right? And these parameters of health data are correlated with most diseases. So, for example, there are wearables that offer you 8, 9, 10 data sets. And in all cases, the doctors, they don't have time to go through the data, and you go there with your Fitbit and say, look, this is what I've done the last 2 weeks or the last month. But the clinicians will use maybe 2 data sets, for example, or heart rate and body temperature, or heart rate and your ECG from last week. So I think they produce more rich data by improving health outcomes. It goes back to the simplicity of understanding the data. It's more about translating the data into meaningful information, which I believe is the challenge now, because the wearables, and I talk to a lot of people, they're producing too much data.
Right.
So, and that represents a challenge for the industry and the clinician itself. But they certainly add a lot of value in saying, actually, I can see a trend in here that your heart rate is up or is down in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So that's the health outcome that you want to identify as quick as possible, and that's where the wearable bring a lot of value, in my opinion.
Yep. And that brings me to my last question, Joao, because I'm very curious about how to make healthcare more continuous. There are various models of healthcare globally. I'm most familiar with the one in the United States because I've lived here in the last 30 years of my life. And I still see a lot of the care that's fragmented, that's disjointed, as patient goes from one physician to the other, from one healthcare system to the next, where their electronic medical records, their data may get lost, and that can significantly worsen their outcomes, as well as the critical medical decisions that take place. So my question, my philosophical question to you is, do you believe that wearables can bridge the fragmented, that healthcare, and improve the quality ultimately?
Wow. Very, very, very complex question in a sense, because
Right.
let me try to make sense of this. Because what we're seeing today, I was actually in a health conference here in UK, Health Tech, with Parliament, with some public health leaders, and most people outside UK think the NHS is one organization, but it's not. It's 250 disjointed, independent organizations using different systems with different budgets, with different processes, with different leaders. So that tells you the story, right?
Yeah.
If you go to Manchester, you have your health records. If you come to London, you're not going to have your data in London because they use different providers, and also they buy off a provider for 5 years, and then you can't get out of the contract. So it's a very difficult challenge to overcome.
So that challenge was not exclusive to United States, I guess.
No, it's a common reality.
Yep.
I think wearables will not actually help improve this because they bring more data and more complexity. Yeah,
I see. Okay.
I think wearables will not help this in any shape or form. What needs to be done is a piece of work that is planning and processes around all these and changing kind of the infrastructure.
I see.
I'll give you a couple of examples, Tim, of good practices, excellent practices. If you see Slovenia, for example, I know it's a smaller country,
right,
but is the most digital economy in the world. Okay, and
wow.
they have all their health records in one place because they've done a lot of planning ahead. They said, let's say the last 10 years, they said, right, in 3 years, we're going to have all the electronic medical records in here. And they've done all the background work. You see, I like Finland as well. And Denmark, I very much like the innovators in the Nordic countries are really, really good. Anyway, Finland is a really hotbed for digital health, but also for wearables. Many, many wearable, well-known brands came from Finland. But all this to say, all this to say, we can learn a lot, and this is a bit about learning. I don't know it all. I've been learning too, but I learned a lot the past 5, 6, 7 years about the Nordic markets. And what they've done was they plan ahead, they execute well, they also have a more open approach in public health to try things out, to let the innovators work with them, and they are a bit more less fragmented and a bit more united. Sometimes, Tim, the nature of the country helps in that regard because they have, for example, a smaller population. 5 or 6 or 10 million is much harder it's much easier to innovate and say, let's get the electronic medical records in one place than 300 million in the United States.
Yeah.
But there is no excuse. The process of execution is the same. Let's plan ahead and do this. So they've done extremely well. And I think in these countries, actually, I'm not a political person, but in these countries, the political system is less aggravated than in other parts of Europe and other parts of North America or South America. because is less tension with the political system. Actually, things work better. They support the innovators, they support the adoption, they support the benefit for the infrastructure for the healthcare. And the proof, as they say in England, is in the pudding, and they see the results. If you go to Slovenia, they have the electronic medical records in all hospitals. If you go to Finland, the same thing. If you go to Denmark, the same thing. And we are lagging behind. In here in UK, now there are organizations, NHS Digital, NHS X, they're doing a lot of good work to bring this all together. But because we're so fragmented and we're so behind, I think it's going to take a few years to actually get everything in one place.
Yeah. Thank you very much, João, for a wonderful global perspective and outlook on healthcare wearable devices. I know I learned a lot, as the others that listened, that watched. I want to leave the last word to you and share any final message or any requests that you have.
Oh, Tim, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your very good questions, I must say. I wish you all the best with your show. I would just say follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, connect with Digital Salute, and we're doing great work in a digital transformation healthcare space. And also follow my YouTube channel, João Bocas on YouTube, Digital Health and Wearables series.
Thank you very much, João.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.